Hi, my name is Jim Denning, and I wrote the book Make It to Midnight, Learning to Live When You Want to Die. And today I want to talk about complex post-traumatic stress or complex post-traumatic stress disorder, and we'll kind of go back in the verbiage on those two. But what I hope to do is explain a little bit of how post-traumatic stress works in the brain, and hopefully understanding how it works will help people to find relief and find help. And some of the therapies that I do and that are available out there can tremendously help with the situation. So first, let's talk about the brain. Sorry, my mouse was a little slow. Anyway, this is the brain. This is the way most people see the brain. Jello mold, upside down bowl of oatmeal, big giant really complex organ that lives in our head. And in actuality, our brain is a bunch of smaller organs that are kind of all put together very neatly, the craftsmanship's unbelievable. But how they're put together, they all should work in harmony. And if they start out working in harmony, but there is trauma, there is negative adverse events that happen throughout somebody's life, you can end up with post-traumatic stress. So one thing's really important to understand with all the complexity we've got going on here and all of the things that the brain can do, when it comes to responses to threats, we still only have three, and those are fight, flight, and freeze. And those three kind of dictate how we respond to stressful events. The problem with those, when we were, for 2.5 million years, humans were roaming the planet, living in caves and hunters and gatherers, and really our goal in life was to find food and not become food. Now we live in a modern world with, mortgages and car payments and all of the things that entrap the world now. We have jobs that we go to, and the job we get money every 2 weeks. We don't get money instantaneously. And if the job is threatened to be lost and we don't know, then we have stress over that. And really, fight, flight, and freeze don't really work that much in the modern world. And when those don't work, you have trauma, you have depression, you have anxiety. So if somebody is exposed to multiple traumatic events, it's going to leave a mark. And that's what we're going to talk about. So this is essentially the brain. Very high level view, and take my laser pointer out here. This is the human part of the brain. This is the thinking part of the brain. This is the part of the brain that is us, that is our personality and our sense of humor and our understanding and our intellect, all the things that make us human. This part of the brain right here is the limbic system, which is the emotional part of the brain. Now the brain kind of works from the bottom up. So you've got your brainstem, which is it's the reptile brain, essentially. It's reflexes. Something scary, you jump. You put your hand on a stove, you yank your hand off real quick. It's just reflex stuff with not a lot of kind of planning or thought behind it, just reflexes. The limbic system here keeps track of previous events, good and bad, and either warns us of them or gets us excited toward them. So, your birthday's coming up, you've had good birthdays your whole life, you're looking forward to it. Conversely, if you live in a house that is abusive and parents are not awesome and there's a lot of yelling and a lot of screaming, you may dread when the front door opens. The sound of the front door may cause your heart to race a little bit. And so that's how this part of the brain works. We're going to go a little bit into more detail. So this is the limbic system, kind of a side view, basic view of what's going on. The thalamus is the part of the brain that hears, sees, touches, and tastes. That's the part that takes sensory input from the outside. It doesn't smell. Smell goes through a different direction. All of the sensory input that happens to you, good, bad, or indifferent, comes through the thalamus. So if you hear loud noises or things, everything you hear comes through that. Now the hippocampus keeps a record of all of those sounds, all of those sights, everything you've had going on. It keeps a record of the emotional parts of it. The amygdala responds emotionally appropriately to the stimuli at hand. And the hypothalamus is actually what deploys out all of the hormones, the cortisol and the adrenaline, to respond to the different things. So in simple post-traumatic stress, what will happen, example, I was in a car wreck a few years ago. I was driving and I was on an overpass and traffic had stopped. I looked in my rearview mirror. I saw a truck coming up behind me at 50, 60 miles an hour, something like that. But I could tell he wasn't going to be able to stop. Okay? The amygdala sends out all the fight or flight stuff. The hypothalamus deploys the chemicals. I grab the steering wheel, get hit, and didn't get badly injured or anything, but it was a scary thing. Now, fast forward 3 months, 6 months, a year, 2 years. I'm sitting on an overpass. Same kind of things going on. I'm just sitting in an overpass. I look in my rearview mirror. I'm a little more scared this time than I used to be. That's post-traumatic stress. I know what happened. I know I'm not in the same place at the same time. I know the circumstances are different. This part of my brain does not care. This part of my brain says, you were on an overpass once and you got hit, and I'm going to prepare you to be hit again, whether you're hit or not. The disorder part comes in when we realize I'm in a totally different place. I'm in a totally different time. None of the variables are the same, and yet I'm scared. And that's because this part of the brain understands place and time. This part of the brain understands I'm on an overpass and a bad thing happened on an overpass, and I don't want that bad thing to happen again. So that is simple post-traumatic stress. Now, what will happen is next time, and hopefully not every time, but when I'm on an overpass, this part kicks in, the hypothalamal pituitary adrenal axis. So what happens is all of those things happen. I realize I'm on an overpass. Hypothalamus sends out a signal to the pituitary, which sends another signal to the adrenal glands to release the fight or flight hormones, fight or flight chemicals. That goes back up and tells my brain there is trauma going on. Okay. What we hope is that that is isolated to a specific incident. And again, 20,000 years ago, we're all living in huts or caves or whatever, and a bear comes running through the village. Okay, all of this happens. The hypothalamus, fight or flight, we run, bear leaves, life is good, we go back to normal. All right, that's the way the system's designed to work, and it works really well. The next time we hear a rustling in the leaves, our brain says, oh, it could be another bear. All of the chemicals kick off again, bear or no bear. We're prepared. And that's this life-saving mechanism of fight, flight, or freeze. Now, fast forward to the modern world. What happens if the danger is actually in your house and inescapable? What happens if there's abuse, there's trauma, there's neglect, all of those things, and it's not a one-time event, but it's a pervasive type of thing? What will happen is that this hypothalamal pituitary adrenal axis never shuts off because it learns the trauma is always there, the trauma is always going to be there, and even if it's not every day, even if it's once a month, it doesn't matter. If it's often enough, that trauma will bury itself and burn itself into this hypothalamal pituitary adrenal axis. And what will happen with this girl is that she will adjust accordingly. Let's say that she's yelled at, she has, doesn't feel real great about herself, goes out into the real world, maybe tries to get some positive male attention. That could turn into a sexual assault. Or if she's sexually abused at home and her self-worth is altered and she goes out into the real world and finds some not nice people and ends up being sex trafficked or ends up being sexually assaulted or abused or ends up in an abusive relationship, then we start getting into complex post-traumatic stress because the initial trauma has now morphed into a pattern of her trying to find something positive but only getting negative in return. What will happen after that point is that this part of the brain gets involved, and this is the prefrontal cortex. As we get older, we've got 3 prefrontal cortex components. The dorsolateral prefrontal cortex is the part of the prefrontal cortex that is in the here and now. It is existing in the moment. I am doing this thing. I am doing this video. I am engaging my prefrontal cortex. The ventromedial prefrontal cortex is the part of the brain that looks to the past, looks to the future. I learned a new word this week, so I'm going to use it. Prometheus is looking into the future. Epimetheus is looking into the past. And so that's the part of the brain that looks into the past. Now, what it does when it looks forward or backwards, it tells the orbital frontal prefrontal cortex to go talk to the emotional brain. So that little girl who has repeated traumas from different people, her ventromedial prefrontal cortex is looking to the past and seeing lots of abuse, and looking to the future and seeing nothing but abuse in her future. And so some of her decisions may not be great. So what will happen at that point is that little girl is now a little older, and 18, 19, 20, maybe she's out of her parents' house, she's on her own, but her self-worth and self-identity have been tattooed by these different events, and her decision making is colored by those different events because her anxiety is always high, her fear is always high because it has been a scary world for her out there. And so what will happen is her brain will start to identify with the trauma, and you can't argue with it. If you've been treated badly your whole life, how can you think any different? It's a natural human reaction, and I see it all the time in my counseling practice. You'll have people come in, boys and girls, rejected by a parent, or affection rejected by a parent, or abused by a parent, or, maybe mom and dad got divorced and dad's like, hey, I'm going to come pick you up this weekend, and he never shows up. The result to the kid is always the same. What did I do wrong? Why did this happen to me? What did I do? How can I make it better? And what will happen is they will adjust their lives to such a point to either reaching out or withdrawing away. And that's what happens here in the left and right prefrontal cortex. The right prefrontal cortex is behavioral inhibition, avoidance, and emotional regulation. The left prefrontal cortex is behavioral activation, approach, emotion, regulation. So the right prefrontal cortex, or backwards on this, right prefrontal cortex is avoidance. If somebody's been abused and traumatized over and over again, and all they see in their future is more abuse and trauma, they're not going to continue on doing those things. They're going to isolate, they're going to hide, or they're going to become bitter and angry. One of the two. The other one is the left prefrontal cortex, the behavioral approach. They may overcompensate because the rejection was so painful. They want love of some sort. And sadly, there are predators out there who are looking for those people. This is your sexual or sex trafficking victim template. There's people out there online looking for that person. People craving and wanting that attention because it's never been there. Then they end up getting sex trafficked, and the complex PTSD ends up with another layer of complexity that can be lifelong. Fortunately, we have new therapies now, one of which I do called accelerated resolution therapy, and there's a video on the YouTube page about it. The news came out and did a story on it. It's actually really cool. It can facilitate that conversation between the emotional brain and the thinking brain. It can contextualize those traumas and really provide a fresh start for a lot of people. I really believe in it. Look it up. It's called accelerated resolution therapy. Come see me if you're in San Antonio or close by. We can figure something out. But anyway, the whole point of this video is there are ways to make this better. There are ways to make this go away. What's fascinating to me is I've had several clients who've been through this and have been through the traumas and are reluctant to do the therapy because they're like, I don't know what I'm going to be like without my trauma. We can work through all that. We can work through everything. There's a world out there that is not scary, that is not mean, that is not horrible, and we can get you there. Anyway, if you'd like to reach out to me, and please do if you need the accelerated resolution therapy or need to find somebody who does it or any of the similar ones, there's the Facebook page and the website, and then there's my email address, and I hope I hear from you.